A former insider breaks his silence, revealing Kamala Harris's secret power network, a hidden machine of influence, corruption, and control. As he hands over damning evidence on live TV, the broadcast is mysteriously cut, and within days he's found dead. What was she hiding? Stay tuned, and we are going to dive into one of the dirtiest secrets of the Democrats. The studio lights flickered as the production crew made last-minute adjustments. The air crackled with anticipation, an electric charge that came whenever a bombshell interview was about to be broadcast. On the other side of the desk, wearing his signature half-smirk, was Tucker Carlson, one of the most polarizing and sharp-witted interviewers in modern media. He thrived in these moments when the truth, or at least the version of it most compelling to the audience, would be laid bare for all to see. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, his guest wasn't just another politician caught up in a minor scandal. No, tonight's interview was poised to shake the very foundations of the Democratic Party. His guest was none other than former Democratic Senator Richard Callaway, a longtime insider, and until now, a loyal party member. His presence here signaled one thing: betrayal. And betrayal was always good for ratings. As Callaway settled into his chair, his face was drawn, his eyes betraying a mix of anxiety and determination. The weight of what he was about to reveal pressed on him like an unbearable burden. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and met Tucker's piercing gaze. Tucker leaned forward. "Senator Callaway, you've been in the trenches of the Democratic Party for nearly 2 decades. You've campaigned alongside Vice President Kamala Harris, served on committees with her, and even defended her policies. And yet, you're here tonight, about to reveal what you call the truth about Kamala Harris. Why now?" Callaway exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around the armrest of his chair. He had spent weeks agonizing over this decision, knowing full well that the moment he spoke out, his career, his reputation, and possibly his personal safety would be on the line. But the truth had to come out. He had seen too much, had been complicit for too long. "This isn't easy for me," Callaway began, his voice steadier than he had expected. "I want to be clear, I didn't come to this decision lightly. For years, I believed in the mission of the Democratic Party, in our core values. I believed that we were fighting for the people, for justice, for fairness. But as time went on, I started to see things that didn't sit right with me." Tucker nodded, letting the tension build. He knew how to keep his audience hooked. "Things like what?" Callaway hesitated, then plunged forward. "Backroom deals, lies to the American people. And Kamala Harris, she was at the center of it all. The Kamala you see on television, the one who smiles and talks about equality, about justice, that's a manufactured persona. Behind closed doors, she's something else entirely." Tucker raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Go on." Callaway glanced off camera for a moment, as if checking for unseen threats, then leaned in. "I first started noticing it back when she was Attorney General of California. There were cases that should have been pursued but weren't. Whistleblowers who were silenced. Judges who were persuaded to see things a certain way. It was all politics, but the kind of politics that makes you question your own morality." Tucker's expression darkened. "You're saying she used her position to cover things up?" Callaway nodded. "Not just that. She used it to punish people. She built alliances with powerful figures, billionaire donors, tech moguls, media executives. And if you crossed her, you disappeared." There was a sharp intake of breath from someone in the studio. Even the crew, usually immune to political bombshells, seemed rattled by the implication. Tucker tapped his pen on the desk, considering his next move. "You're making serious accusations, Senator. Are you saying Kamala Harris weaponized the justice system for personal and political gain?" Callaway's lips tightened. "I am, and I have proof." The room fell into a hushed silence. Even Tucker, known for his unflappable demeanor, looked momentarily taken aback. Proof was the one thing that separated conspiracies from reality, and if Callaway had it, this interview was about to become historic. "Proof?" Tucker echoed, his voice low and deliberate. "What kind of proof?" Callaway reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. He held it up between his fingers, letting the camera capture its gleam under the studio lights. Documents, emails, recordings, evidence of direct orders she gave, directives to suppress investigations, to alter narratives. And that's just the beginning. Tucker leaned back, a slow smile creeping across his face. This is big. He turned to the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing history. What Senator Callaway is revealing tonight is not just political gossip. It is the kind of revelation that can change everything we thought we knew about those in power. Callaway took a deep breath. This was only the beginning. The full extent of Kamala Harris's alleged corruption had yet to be unveiled. And as much as it terrified him, he knew that the American people deserved to hear the truth. Tucker turned back to him. Let's start from the beginning, Senator. Tell us, how deep does this rabbit hole go? The camera zoomed in on Callaway's face as he prepared to reveal everything. And across the country, millions of viewers leaned in, bracing themselves for the secrets that were about to be exposed. Callaway took a sip of water, his fingers trembling slightly. He had just scratched the surface, and already the air in the studio felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. Tucker Carlson, ever the skilled interrogator, leaned forward once more. Senator, you mentioned a network. What exactly is this shadow network you're referring to? Callaway let out a slow breath. It's a coalition of power players, corporate titans, political strategists, media executives, all working behind the scenes to control narratives, suppress opposition, and ensure that people like Kamala Harris remain untouchable. Tucker's eyes narrowed. And you're saying Harris wasn't just part of this network? She was central to it? Callaway nodded. Absolutely. She wasn't just a participant. She was one of the architects. The former senator leaned in. I have documents linking her to strategic efforts to undermine political opponents. Funding trails leading to front organizations designed to push her policy agenda. Even direct correspondences between her team and media outlets instructing them on how to handle certain stories or how to bury them. Tucker pressed further. Are you saying there's a coordinated effort between Harris and major media outlets to shape public perception? Callaway nodded. Not just public perception, election results, legal outcomes, policy decisions. This network controls it all, and she is a key player in ensuring it functions smoothly. And I can prove it. Tucker folded his hands, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. Let's see the proof, Senator. Callaway tightened his grip on the desk, his eyes glinting with both fear and defiance. Tucker, it goes deeper than just media manipulation and election interference. Kamala Harris didn't just work within the system. She built an entire machinery of power around herself. Tucker leaned forward. Machinery? Explain. She created a network of operatives who operated outside the official channels of government. Lobbyists, former intelligence officers, even members of organized crime groups. They handled the dirty work, intimidation, disinformation, even financial blackmail. And it all led back to her office. Tucker's brow furrowed. You're saying she had a private intelligence operation? Callaway nodded. Yes, and I have evidence that government resources, our tax dollars, were funneled into it. There were slush funds, shell corporations, offshore accounts. The money trail is clear. A hush fell over the room. Even the cameraman had stopped shifting. Callaway pulled out another flash drive. This one contains financial records. Transfers to and from accounts that were meant to be charitable donations, but were in reality funding covert operations. Tucker took the drive and turned back to the camera. If what you're saying is true, this isn't just corruption. It's a shadow government. Callaway nodded solemnly. And Kamala Harris is at the center of it. The moment those words left Callaway's lips, an eerie silence filled the studio. Even Tucker Carlson, usually composed, took a moment to process the weight of the claim. He glanced at the flash drive in his hand, then back at Callaway, his journalistic instincts sharpening like a blade. Let's break this down, Tucker said. You're saying that while Kamala Harris was climbing the political ladder, she wasn't just playing the system. She was building one of her own? Callaway nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. She used her authority to create a structure of influence that extended far beyond her official position. It wasn't just about political favors or campaign funds. She established an underground network that could control narratives, suppress opposition, and ensure her continued rise to power. Tucker tapped his pen on the desk, considering the ramifications. And This network, what does it do exactly? Calloway leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly, as if revealing a dangerous secret. It controls information. It manufactures political victories. It silences those who stand in the way. Think about it, Tucker. How many scandals has Kamala Harris been linked to? How many accusations have surfaced, only to disappear without a trace? This is no accident. It's by design. Tucker's eyes narrowed. Give me an example. Calloway inhaled deeply before responding. In 2016, when she was California's Attorney General, there was a massive case involving a pharmaceutical company accused of bribing state officials to avoid regulatory scrutiny. There were documents, whistleblowers, even internal emails confirming the corruption. And yet, nothing happened. The case was dismissed, the whistleblowers silenced, and the company made a large donation to a super PAC supporting Harris's Senate campaign. Tucker scoffed. You're saying she killed the investigation in exchange for campaign money? Precisely. A murmur ran through the studio. Even off camera, staff members exchanged glances. Tucker knew this story was explosive, but he wasn't done yet. And you're telling me, Tucker pressed, that this wasn't just a one-time deal? That she built an entire apparatus around this kind of corruption? Calloway's face darkened. Yes, and it evolved. Over the years, she developed ties with media executives who ensured that damaging stories never saw the light of day. She had connections with corporate leaders who funneled money through legal loopholes. And worst of all, she had allies within law enforcement who made sure her enemies paid the price. Tucker sat back, running a hand through his hair. Senator, these are extraordinary claims. Do you have any direct evidence linking her to these activities? Calloway didn't hesitate. Yes, and I'm about to show you. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it across the desk. Tucker opened it, his expression shifting as he skimmed the pages. There were financial statements, internal memos, and even what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations. Tell me about this, Tucker said, holding up a document labeled Directive 17A. Calloway's voice was steady. That is a direct order from Harris's office instructing a high-ranking DOJ official to halt an investigation into a tech firm accused of violating federal privacy laws. That same firm later donated millions to her presidential campaign. Tucker's face twisted in disgust. So she wasn't just covering up crimes, she was profiting off them? Calloway nodded. It gets worse. I have records showing that journalists who pursued stories critical of her administration received sudden visits from federal agencies. IRS audits, FBI investigations. Some even lost their jobs. Tucker exhaled sharply, shaking his head. This is beyond corruption. This is tyranny. Calloway's voice was grave. And it's been happening for years. The weight of the revelations settled over the studio like a thick fog. The broadcast was still live, millions of Americans watching, jaws hanging open in shock. Tucker Carlson knew he had just been handed one of the biggest political scandals of the century. But he also knew what came next. If this is all true, Tucker said, closing the folder, then Kamala Harris is not just a corrupt politician. She's the architect of one of the most sophisticated influence machines in American history. Calloway's voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, and she will do anything to protect it. The tension in the room was suffocating. The audience, the crew, even Tucker himself. Everyone knew they were playing with fire. But the interview wasn't over yet. Tucker adjusted his tie and leaned forward once more. All right, Senator, you've given us the setup. Now tell me, how far does this machine go? And who else is involved? Calloway looked directly into the camera, his next words promising to shake the nation to its core. This isn't just about Kamala Harris. This is about an entire system. And if I tell you everything, I may not live to see tomorrow. The screen faded to commercial break. And across America, millions of people sat frozen, waiting for the next bombshell to drop. The commercial break stretched longer than usual, as if the network itself was hesitating, deciding whether to proceed. Tucker Carlson checked his phone. Several missed calls from unlisted numbers. His producer rushed over, whispering something urgent, but Tucker waved him off. He knew they had crossed the line tonight, but he also knew there was no turning back. As the camera light blinked red, signaling they were back on air, Tucker turned to Calloway. Before the break, you said this isn't just about Kamala Harris. It's about an entire system. Who else is involved? Calloway exhaled, then leaned closer. Tucker, we're talking about some of the most powerful people in the country. It extends beyond the White House, beyond Congress. Corporate moguls, intelligence officials, tech giants. They all have a stake in keeping this machine running. Tucker's eyebrows shot up. You mean to tell me that Harris is just a part of something even bigger? She's a key player, Calloway clarified. But not the only one. The system survives by rotating figures in and out of power. If one falls, another takes their place. The real architects, the ones pulling the strings, remain hidden. Tucker pressed on. Can you name names? Calloway hesitated. His fingers drummed against the desk, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for unseen threats. Then, in a steady voice, he said, I can. And I will. He reached into his briefcase again, pulling out another folder. This one was thicker, marked Eyes Only. He slid it across the desk. Tucker opened it carefully. Inside were transcripts of private meetings, classified reports, and evidence of high-level coordination between government officials and corporate executives. There were signatures, some belonging to household names, others to figures rarely seen in public, but wielding immense power behind the scenes. Good Lord, Tucker muttered. This isn't just corruption. This is treason. Calloway nodded grimly. And they'll do anything to keep it quiet. As the interview continued, the atmosphere in the studio grew increasingly tense. The weight of Calloway's claims settled over everyone like a storm cloud. Some crew members looked nervous, others outright terrified. This was no longer just an exposé. It was a direct challenge to the establishment. Then, without warning, the studio lights flickered. A dull thud echoed from outside the room. Tucker glanced toward his producer, who was frantically gesturing for him to wrap up. Something was happening. Calloway noticed it too. He leaned into the microphone. If something happens to me, if this interview is cut short, I need people to know. The files are out there. I've sent them to trusted sources. No matter what they do, the truth will come out. Tucker swallowed hard. What do you mean if something happens to you? Calloway gave him a pointed look. They're watching. Right now. At that moment, the studio doors burst open. Two men in dark suits entered, followed by network executives with panicked expressions. One of them whispered something in Tucker's ear, but he ignored it. He turned back to the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we're being asked to stop this interview. But let me be clear, this story is far from over. Calloway smirked, defiant. No, Tucker, this is just the beginning. The screen suddenly cut to black. Millions of viewers at home gasped as their screens went dark. The broadcast was over. In the days that followed, the interview became the most talked-about event in the country. Clips spread like wildfire online, but some were mysteriously taken down. The mainstream media downplayed the claims, calling them unsubstantiated conspiracy theories, while government officials refused to comment. Then came the real shocker. 3 days after the interview, Calloway was found dead in his hotel room. The official report labeled it a heart attack, but those who had seen the interview knew better. His death only fueled speculation, turning him into a martyr for those who believed in his cause. Tucker Carlson, meanwhile, found himself under immense pressure. Sponsors pulled out. Anonymous threats flooded his inbox. Even his personal security detail was doubled. But he refused to back down. A week later, he heard a follow-up segment. I want the American people to remember something, he said, looking straight into the camera. Senator Calloway risked everything to tell the truth. And now he's gone. Ask yourself why. Who benefits from his silence? And most importantly, who's next? The question lingered unanswered. But across the nation, a movement had begun. People started digging, uncovering links, demanding answers. The machinery of power had been exposed, and no amount of damage control could fully contain it. The reckoning had begun. And Kamala Harris? She remained silent. But for the first time in her career, silence wasn't enough. The American people were watching, and they weren't looking away.